Welcome to today's Explainer. We are unpacking a genuinely fascinating and honestly deeply provocative documentary called 97% Owned. Now, if you've ever had this sneaking suspicion that the global economy is kind of a rigged game, well, we're going to map out exactly how the source material argues that's happening, because it turns out the very mechanism of how our money is created is basically designed to ensure that the rich get richer while the rest of us stay trapped in a cycle of debt. We're going to challenge some very basic assumptions today, and we are starting with the actual money in your pocket right now. Or actually, scratch that, the money in your bank account. Right out of the gate, we need to talk about this number from the documentary's central analysis, 97.4%. That is the exact percentage of the UK money supply that is completely digital and created, wait for it, out of absolutely nothing. And it's not created by the government, it is created by private commercial banks. It's a stunning figure, right? It literally flips everything we think we know about finance completely on its head. So that brings us to absolutely crucial question. Where does money actually come from? I mean, most of us grew up with this childhood piggy bank mentality. We assume the government prints all the money, we go out and earn it, we save it in a local bank, and then the bank safely locks it away in a vault. Well, the documentary dismantles that myth entirely. You know, the gap between what we think happens and what actually happens is just staggering. What you probably think happens is that a pensioner carefully saves her money for decades, and the bank just acts as a friendly middleman, taking her specific savings and lending them out to, say, a young couple buying their first house. But what actually happens, according to the source, it's almost comical. Banks simply type new digital numbers into a computer system. When they issue a loan, they aren't moving existing money around at all. No, they are bringing brand new money into existence as debt. The contrast here is incredibly stark. When you look at the documentary's 2010 figures, only a tiny sliver, just 2.6% of the money supply, is physical cash. That's the actual paper and coins created debt-free by the state, where the profit of printing it goes straight back to the public treasury. The vast, overwhelming majority, that entire 97.4%, is digital, commercial bank money. Let's define exactly what that means. Commercial bank money is simply electronic money created as an accounting entry. That's it. Whenever a private bank extends credit to a customer or buys existing assets, they are literally creating new money. And here's the kicker. That money only disappears or gets destroyed when the loan is finally repaid. So the money itself is temporary. But you know what isn't? The interest the bank collects on it. That is a permanent transfer of wealth straight from your pocket into their profit margins. Okay, let's walk through how this works step by step. Step 1. You sit down and sign a loan agreement for a new house or business. Step 2. The bank doesn't send someone down to a dusty vault to count out your cash. An employee simply types some numbers into your account. And step 3, boom, just like that, new digital money enters circulation. You go buy that house, and that newly created digital money is now freely flowing through the broader economy. Section 1. The Asset Inflation Trap. Because private banks are the ones creating our money, they're the ones who get to decide exactly where it goes. And according to the documentary, this is where the system systematically benefits the wealthiest 1% while basically locking everyone else out. Instead of making productive investments that build the real economy, things that create jobs or help small businesses, banks strongly prefer speculative investments. Think housing. It guarantees the banks high returns with very low risk, but it does absolutely nothing for everyday workers. It's really just a zero-sum game of wealth redistribution that heavily favors the people who are already wealthy. And the sheer scale of this is breathtaking. Between 1998 and 27, the UK money supply essentially tripled. Private banks created a staggering £1.2 trillion out of thin air. Just take a second to imagine injecting that much raw purchasing power into an economy. Where on earth did it all go? Well, the answer is right here in this number, 85.5%. As of August 2011, 85.5% of all consumer bank lending was secured as mortgages on dwellings. The documentary argues that this is the exact reason housing prices have skyrocketed completely out of reach for the working class. Because think about it, if you pump £1 trillion of brand new money almost exclusively into the housing market, prices don't just go up, they explode into a massive asset bubble. Which leads us perfectly to this incredibly vivid metaphor from the source material. It describes a major investment bank as a giant vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity. Pretty intense, right? But when large financial institutions funnel freshly created wealth exclusively into speculative bubbles, it literally locks younger generations out of homeownership. It starves the productive everyday economy of the capital it desperately needs to actually thrive. Section 2. The Great Wealth Transfer. So, this entire system acts as a hidden vacuum for your wallet. Think about this brutal paradox for a second. For every pound of money in the economy, there is a pound of debt. Because all money is created as a loan, we are completely trapped. If everyone paid off all their debts tomorrow, almost all the money in the economy would simply vanish. To have a growing economy under this design, we are literally required to have growing debt. That means the working class is forced into a perpetual cycle of borrowing just to survive. And this brings us to the absolute core of why the rich get richer while the poor stay poor. Over in the real economy, people are working harder than ever. Dual incomes are required just to scrape by, and real wages are dropping. But meanwhile, over in the financial sector, they are pulling in record profits just by collecting interest on money they literally typed into existence. It is a constant one-way wealth transfer. Interest payments are constantly flowing out of poorer regions and small businesses and going straight to Wall Street and the City of London. Looking back at the monetary milestones of how we actually got here is super fascinating. Back in 1844, the UK government actually stopped private banks from printing paper notes because it was causing too much inflation. But oops, they completely forgot to regulate digital deposits. Fast forward to 1971, the US dollar comes off the gold standard, which removes the very last physical constraint on money creation. This completely unleashed private banks to exponentially expand credit, setting the perfect stage for the chaotic, debt-fueled 2008 global credit crash. Section 3. Socializing the bank losses. The documentary points to this incredibly candid quote from former Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke back in 2009. When he was asked if the $160 billion used to bail out the massive insurance giant AIG was taxpayer money, he bluntly admitted it wasn't. He said, "To lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account. They literally just typed the bailout money into existence." Let that sink in for a moment. And this brilliantly illustrates what we call the bailout trap. Governments are essentially held hostage by the banks. Why? Well, because if they let the major banks fail, 97% of the public's money supply would vanish right along with them. So the whole system is rigged. The public is forced to provide the insurance and absorb all the catastrophic risks, meaning everyday people pay the painful price of inflation and austerity, while the bankers get to keep the enormous profits and their massive bonuses. The source material leaves us with this really heavy realization. A growing banking sector is not actually a sign of a healthy economy. When the financial sector balloons, it acts as a parasite draining the productive world. The financialization of our economy masks a really tragic decrease in our actual standard of living. It forces everyday families to take on more and more debt just to maintain the exact same status quo their parents had with a single income. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought from our explainer today. If our money is fundamentally created as debt in the first place, how can we as a society ever truly be debt-free? It really forces you to rethink everything you thought you knew about your paycheck, your mortgage, and the entire global economy. Keep questioning, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me to unpack this incredible documentary.